A billionaire adopted 7 abandoned children, and now, 20 years later, the shocking truth is finally coming out. Everyone thought it was a miracle. A lonely man saving kids who had no one. But the truth? It's darker than anyone ever imagined. Because the moment those 7 now-grown children return for the reading of the will, everything explodes. Instead of money, they're handed a single letter. A letter that reveals their entire lives were a lie. Their names were changed. Their parents didn't abandon them. And the billionaire didn't save them out of charity. He was hiding them from something. Now, as old secrets rise and danger closes in, the family realizes the past isn't finished with them. Not even close. So what exactly were they being protected from? And why has that danger come back for them now? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The October morning dawned with a heavy grey sky that matched the somber mood of the 7 Lockridge siblings. A chill wind swept down from the Colorado mountains, rustling the golden leaves that carpeted the long driveway leading to their father's estate. One by one, they arrived, their cars pulling up to the imposing stone mansion that had once been their sanctuary. Ava was the first to arrive, her nursing scrubs traded for a simple black dress. She sat in her car for a long moment, studying the weathered stones of the house where Graham had given them all a second chance at life. The mansion's windows stared back at her like dark, knowing eyes. Jonah's truck rumbled up next, parking with a sharp jerk that betrayed his inner tension. He barely nodded at Ava as he passed, his contractor's hand stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. The space between them felt wider than the handful of steps that separated them. "Morning," he muttered, his voice gruff with emotion he wouldn't acknowledge. Ruthie arrived in tears, mascara already smudged beneath her eyes. She practically ran to Ava, wrapping her arms around her sister's waist. "I can't believe he's really gone," she whispered against Ava's shoulder. Marcus pulled up in his bet-up musician's van, guitar case in the back, like always. His usual easy smile was nowhere to be seen as he joined his siblings on the front steps. His fingers tapped an anxious rhythm against his thigh, a song trying to process what words couldn't. Elisa's sensible sedan arrived next, her elementary teacher's optimism dimmed, but still visible in the gentle way she touched each sibling's arm in greeting. She carried a box of tissues in her purse, always prepared to care for others. Caleb's military bearing was evident in his rigid posture as he walked up from the guest house where he'd spent the night, unable to sleep in his childhood room. His combat-trained eyes swept the perimeter out of habit, checking for threats even here at home. Grace was last, her young face pale as she clutched her purse like a shield. At 23, she'd had the least time with Graham, and now she'd never have more. Her heels clicked uncertainly on the stone steps as she joined her siblings. The lawyer, Mr. Patterson, met them at the door. His familiar face was etched with sympathy as he ushered them into the library. The room still smelled of Graham's pipe tobacco and old leather, the walls of books watching over them like silent guardians of their past. They settled into their seats awkwardly, each choosing spots that reflected their emotional distance. Ava perched straight-backed in Graham's old leather chair, her nurse's training evident in her composed expression. Jonah leaned against a bookshelf, too tense to sit. Ruthie curled into the window seat, dabbing at her eyes. Marcus slouched in an armchair, his long legs stretched out before him. Elise sat primly on the sofa, hands folded in her lap. Caleb stood at parade rest near the door, while Grace sank into the furthest corner of the couch, her purse clutched tightly to her chest. The leather of Mr. Patterson's briefcase creaked as he opened it, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice gentle but professional. As you know, we're here to discuss the disposition of your father's estate. Ava noticed how he said father without hesitation, though Graham had adopted them all from different backgrounds, different tragedies. In his eyes and in his heart, they had always been his children. I'll be direct, Mr. Patterson continued, removing a thick document from his briefcase. Your father has left the entirety of his estate, the house, his investments, all assets, to charity. The silence shattered. Jonah pushed off from the bookshelf with a sharp curse. What? That can't be right, Ruthie whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Marcus sat up straight, his usual easy manner falling away. He left us nothing? Not nothing, Mr. Patterson corrected, reaching back into his briefcase. He withdrew 7 sealed envelopes, each bearing a name in Graham's precise handwriting. He left each of you a letter. Grace's fingers tightened on her purse until her knuckles went white. Just letters? The estate will be converted into a charitable foundation, Mr. Patterson explained, laying the envelopes carefully on the antique table that had hosted so many family dinners. The details are all here in the will. Caleb's jaw tightened as he studied the letters. Did he explain why? I believe, Mr. Patterson said carefully, that your letters will contain those answers. Elise reached for her tissue box, offering it to Ruthie even as she blinked back her own tears. He must have had a reason, she said softly. Dad always had a reason. The siblings looked at the row of envelopes, each bearing their names in the handwriting they'd seen on countless permission slips and birthday cards over the years. The letters seemed to hold the weight of all their questions, all their unfinished conversations with the man who had saved them all. Ava felt the other's eyes on her as she reached for her envelope. As the one who'd been most like Graham, quiet, steady, observant, they seemed to be waiting for her lead. Her fingers trembled slightly as they touched the heavy paper. The sound of the seal breaking was like a thunderclap in the quiet room. The letter inside was several pages long, folded with Graham's characteristic precision. Ava held it for a moment without opening it, feeling the weight of her siblings' attention and the even heavier weight of Graham's final words to her. The library clock ticked steadily in the silence, marking each moment of hesitation. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the house, a door creaked on its hinges. Small sounds that seemed to echo in the space between 7 hearts, trying to decide whether to face the past or walk away from it. Ava's hands stayed steady now as she held the letter, poised to unfold it. The others watched, their own letters untouched before them, waiting to see what secrets their father had left behind. What explanation could possibly make sense of this final surprise from a man who had spent his life protecting them? I think we should read them together, Ruthie said, her voice wavering. Whatever Dad wanted to tell us, maybe we should hear it all at once. The others exchanged glances, a mix of reluctance and agreement passing between them. One by one they nodded, though Grace's hands shook as she picked up her envelope. I'll start, Ivor offered, unfolding her letter with careful movements. She cleared her throat and began to read. My dearest Ava, there are truths I should have shared long ago, burdens I carried alone that will now pass to you and your siblings. 20 years ago, I didn't adopt 7 children out of simple philanthropy. I chose each of you specifically because your birth families had been targeted by a powerful drug cartel. Ivor's voice faltered. The room grew impossibly still. Keep reading, Jonah urged, his knuckles white against the arm of his chair. Your birth parents were witnesses, whistleblowers, or innocent bystanders who knew too much. The cartel's reach was vast, their influence extending into law enforcement and government agencies. I couldn't save your birth families, but I could save you. Each of you was given a new identity, A new birth certificate, a chance at life without looking over your shoulder. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This can't be real. Elise opened her letter with trembling fingers, scanning the words. Mine says the same thing. About the cartel. About my real parents. One by one, they read portions of their letters aloud. Each revealed the same core truth. Their adoption had been an elaborate rescue operation. Graham had used his wealth and connections to create new identities for 7 children who would otherwise have been killed. Caleb's military posture crumbled as he read his letter. He says my birth name was Miguel Sanchez. My father was a police detective in Arizona who uncovered a trafficking route. Daniel Thompson, Jonah said hollowly, staring at his letter. That was my name. My parents were accountants who found suspicious transactions. The sound of china rattling interrupted their revelations. Miriam Hayes stood in the doorway, a tea tray in her shaking hands. Her face had gone pale as she took in the scene, the opened letters, the shocked expressions, the heavy weight of truth settling over the room. You knew, Ava said. It wasn't a question. Miriam set the tray down carefully, her movements measured despite her obvious distress. Yes, I helped your father maintain the documentation, the false trails, everything needed to keep you safe. All these years, Grace whispered. Everything was a lie? No, Miriam said firmly. Your father's love was real. The family you built together was real. The only lies were the ones that kept you alive. Ruthie's sob broke through the tension. She curled into herself, shoulders shaking, and for the first time since arriving, her siblings moved as one. Ava reached her first, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Elise knelt beside her, holding her hand. Even Jonah, usually so distant, stepped closer to offer silent support. I don't understand. Ruthie managed between sobs. Why didn't he tell us? Why keep it secret even after we were grown? Miriam poured tea with practiced movements, though her hands still trembled slightly. The cartel never stopped looking. Graham spent his life creating an impenetrable shield around all of you. She paused, swallowing hard. He died believing that shield needed to stay in place. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, making it hard to breathe. The siblings looked at each other with new eyes, seeing past the familiar faces to the strangers they might have been, the lives they might have lived, the deaths they might have died. Hours passed in a blur of questions, tears, and stunned silences. The sun began to set, casting long shadows through the library windows. Eventually hunger drew them to the dining room, where Mrs. Chen, the cook who had served their family for 15 years, had prepared a simple meal of soup and bread. They sat at the long table where they'd shared countless meals as children, but everything felt different now. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch them with new intensity. The familiar click of spoons against bowls felt somehow foreign. We should stay, Caleb said finally, breaking the heavy silence. At least for tomorrow. There has to be more to understand about all this. No one argued. They'd come expecting to close a chapter of their lives, but instead they'd opened a book they never knew existed. One by one, they nodded their agreement to stay, to search for more answers, to face together whatever other truths might be hiding in their father's legacy. The simple meal continued in uneasy quiet, broken only by occasional murmurs for salt or bread. Outside, night settled over the estate like a blanket, but inside, 7 siblings sat awake with their thoughts, their memories rearranging themselves around the truth they'd learned, their understanding of their past and their father transforming with each passing moment. Miriam moved quietly around the table, refilling water glasses, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She carried 2 decades of their secrets, had helped maintain the elaborate fiction of their lives. Now she watched them process the truth with a mixture of relief and worry in her eyes. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 8, its familiar chimes echoing through the house. None of them moved to leave the table, though their bowls were empty and the bread was gone. They sat together, bound by shared shock and shared history, their father's letters burning in their pockets like live coals, waiting for tomorrow to bring more clarity to their suddenly uncertain world. Dawn crept over the Colorado mountains, finding the Lockridge siblings already awake in their childhood bedrooms. None had slept well, their minds racing with questions about their true identities and the weight of their father's revelations. The kitchen, usually a place of warmth and comfort, felt different that morning. Ava was the first to arrive, finding Mrs. Chen already preparing coffee and a simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. One by one, the others filtered in, drawn by the familiar scents and their growling stomachs. "I had the strangest dream," Elise said, breaking the morning silence as she stirred cream into her coffee. "I was in a different house with different parents, but it felt so real." Caleb nodded, pushing his eggs around his plate. "I keep thinking about these flashes I have, a woman's voice singing in Spanish. I always thought I'd made it up." "The playground," Ruthie said suddenly. "Remember how Dad never let us go to public playgrounds? He'd built that enormous one in the backyard instead." "And the security cameras," Marcus added. "The guards that were always maintenance workers." Jonah's fork clattered against his plate. "The self-defense classes he insisted on, the tracking devices in our phones. He wasn't being overprotective. He was terrified they'd find us." Their fragmentary memories began connecting like puzzle pieces, forming a clearer picture of their carefully guarded childhood. Each recollection sparked another, building a web of protected moments they'd never understood until now. Miriam entered the kitchen, her face showing signs of her own sleepless night. "When you're ready," she said softly. "There's more you need to see." They followed her through the familiar corridors of the mansion to Graham's private study. The room still held his presence, the leather chair worn smooth where he'd sat, the reading glasses folded on the desk, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco lingering in the air. Miriam approached one of the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, her fingers trailing along the spines until she found what she was looking for. With a gentle pull on Great Expectations, there was a soft click, and the entire section of shelving swung forward, revealing a hidden room behind it. "Your father's sanctuary," Miriam explained, flipping a switch that illuminated the space. "Where he kept everything he couldn't risk being found." The room was smaller than they expected, but every inch was purposeful. Filing cabinets lined one wall, a sophisticated computer setup occupied another, and in the center stood a large table covered with maps and documents. 7 drawers, Miriam said, indicating the filing cabinets. "One for each of you. Everything about your birth families, your original identities, the circumstances that brought you here, it's all inside." The siblings exchanged glances, the weight of the moment heavy between them. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they each moved toward the cabinet that held their truth. Hours passed as they immersed themselves in their histories. The room filled with the sound of rustling paper, occasional gasps, and muffled sobs as they discovered pieces of themselves they'd never known existed. Irva's hands trembled as she lifted a small cassette tape labeled Maria Santiago, Church Choir, 1995. Miriam helped her find an old player, and suddenly the room filled with a clear, powerful voice singing Amazing Grace. Ava's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face as she heard her birth mother's voice for the first time in 20 years. She was beautiful, Miriam said gently, showing Ava a photograph of a young woman in a choir robe, her face radiant with joy. She died protecting you, making sure you reached safety when the cartel came for your father's congregation. Across the room, Jonah stood rigid, staring at a photograph he'd found. It showed a man who shared his strong jaw and dark eyes, holding a baby, holding him, with such obvious love it made his chest ache. The caption read, "Daniel and James Thompson, last photo before incident." "He used to carry you everywhere," Miriam told him, seeing his fixed gaze. "Your mother said he couldn't bear to put you down. When they discovered the cartel's money laundering scheme, their first thought was keeping you safe. They died making sure you would live." The afternoon wore on, each sibling discovering pieces of their past. Birth certificates with their original names, newspaper clippings about their parents' stands against corruption, letters, photographs, and detailed accounts of how Graham had found each of them and created their new identities. When the emotional weight became too heavy to bear, they wandered out to the estates, gardens, seeking solace in the fresh air and familiar paths. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns where they'd played as children, oblivious to the sacrifice and danger that had brought them together. Ava found herself by the rose garden, where their father had spent countless hours tending to his prized blooms. Now she understood why he'd always seemed to be watching the perimeter, even while pruning or watering. She'd thought it was just his way. Now she knew he'd been standing guard. As evening approached, they gathered in the living room, drawn to the fireplace where they'd spent so many winter nights as children. Mrs. Chen brought them hot chocolate, the same recipe she'd used when they were young, and they sat in contemplative silence, watching the flames dance. "It's strange," Grace said finally, her voice soft. "I came here angry at Dad for leaving us nothing, but he left us everything. Our lives, our safety, each other. We were so focused on what we thought we'd lost." Caleb added, "We never saw what he'd given us." The fire crackled, casting warm light across their faces. They sat closer together than they had in years, the shared weight of their discoveries creating a tentative bridge across the distances they'd allowed to grow between them. "There's more to go through," Ruthie said, thinking of the files still waiting in the hidden room. "More to understand." Jonah nodded, his usual gruffness softened by the day's revelations. "We'll do it together, tomorrow morning." They stayed by the fire as night settled over the estate, each lost in thought but drawing comfort from the other's presence. The bond between them, stretched thin over years of misunderstandings and separate lives, began to strengthen, not despite the truth they'd learned, but because of it. The grandfather clock chimed 10, its familiar sound echoing through the house. None of them moved to leave, content to sit with their newly discovered past and each other, knowing that tomorrow would bring more revelations, more understanding, and perhaps more healing. The morning sun crept through the study windows, casting long shadows across the oriental carpet as the Lockridge siblings gathered once again. Unlike yesterday's emotional tumult, they approached the task with determined focus, spreading the files across Graham's massive oak desk. "We should organize these chronologically," Ava suggested, her business background showing as she pulled out a notebook. "Start with the earliest cases and track how everything connects." Caleb nodded, already sorting papers with military precision. "Good idea. We need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." They worked methodically, creating timelines that stretched back over 20 years. The cartel's expansion across the American Southwest unfolded like a dark spider web, each thread leading to another family destroyed, another life shattered. "Look at this," Ruthie said, her voice trembling as she held up a newspaper clipping from 1997. A whole community in New Mexico stood up against them. The cartel was using their farms to move drugs across the border. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, scanning the article. Those farmers were heroes. They knew what they were risking. but they did it anyway. Grace hugged herself, remembering the file about her own parents, teachers who had discovered cartel recruitment in their high school. Just like our birth parents, they all chose to fight back, even knowing the danger. The morning wore on as they pieced together their shared history. Jonah discovered records of shell companies used for money laundering. Elise found patterns in seemingly unrelated business takeovers. Each revelation painted a clearer picture of why their birth families had become targets. Around 11 o'clock, Caleb found something that made him pause. A thick manila envelope marked, "If anything happens to me," in their father's distinctive handwriting. "Everyone!" he called, his voice tight. The others gathered around as he carefully opened the seal. Inside, they found meticulously gathered evidence: bank records, photographs, transcribed conversations, and a list of names. Government officials, judges, police chiefs, all with detailed documentation of their connections to cartel operations. Dad was building a case. Ivor breathed, scanning the papers. He wasn't just hiding us. He was trying to expose the whole system. No wonder he was so paranoid about security. Jonah muttered, running a hand through his hair. He knew exactly who he was up against. The weight of their father's secret war settled heavily on their shoulders. Graham hadn't just been a protective parent. He'd been a warrior for justice, fighting a battle that had ultimately cost him his life. By 1 o'clock, their eyes were burning from reading documents, and their minds were overwhelmed with information. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, announcing lunch was ready in the sunroom. The sunroom had always been their favorite space, with its wall of windows overlooking the gardens and comfortable wicker furniture. Sunshine streamed through the glass, warming the space, and somehow making their discoveries feel less overwhelming. Grace, sensing the heavy mood, tried to lighten things up. "Remember when Jonah tried to teach us all martial arts in here?" she asked, grinning. "And he kicked over Mum's favorite plant." A smile tugged at Jonah's lips. "As I recall, you were the one who suggested using the plant stand as a target. At least it wasn't as bad as Marcus's attempt at indoor basketball," Elise added. And soon they were all sharing memories, letting the warmth of shared history ease their troubled minds. After lunch, Miriam joined them with fresh coffee and news that made their brief respite evaporate. "There's something else you need to know," she said, settling into a chair. "Your father had scheduled a meeting with Agent Thomas Parker, a retired FBI agent who'd been tracking cartel activities for years. The meeting was set for the day after." She paused, swallowing hard. "The day after he died." The siblings exchanged alarmed looks. Caleb leaned forward, his military training kicking in. "You're saying his death might not have been natural?" Miriam nodded slowly. "The heart attack seemed sudden, unexpected. Graham was in excellent health. He'd just had a checkup the week before." "Why didn't you tell us this before?" Ava demanded, but her anger faded when she saw the pain in Miriam's eyes. "Because I couldn't prove anything," Miriam replied softly. "And because Graham made me promise to wait until you knew everything else first." The revelation sparked an urgent discussion about their safety. The estate, once their sanctuary, suddenly felt exposed. "Should we even be staying here?" Ruthie asked, twisting her hands in her lap. "If they got to Dad, we need to be smart about this," Caleb said, his tactical mind already working. "Moving might make us more vulnerable. We need to—" The sharp wail of approaching sirens cut through the air, making them all jump. Grace rushed to the window, her face pale. "Police cars," she whispered, watching the vehicles speed up the long driveway. 3 of them. The siblings froze, the sound of sirens growing louder, each wondering if they were about to face friends or foes. The piercing wail of sirens shattered the afternoon quiet. 3 black SUVs with federal plates rolled up the mansion's circular driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the late autumn sun. The siblings exchanged nervous glances as heavy footsteps echoed on the front porch. Miriam hurried to answer the door before the agents could knock. 4 stern-faced men in dark suits entered, their FBI badges glinting under the foyer chandelier. The lead agent, a weathered man with silver temples, introduced himself as Special Agent Michael Torres. "We need to speak with all of you," he said, his expression grave. "Immediately." They gathered in the library, the same room where they'd read their father's letters just days ago. The weight of federal attention pressed down on them like a physical force. Grace perched on the edge of the leather sofa, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Jonah remained standing, his arms crossed, while Ruthie sat close to Grace, offering silent support. Agent Torres didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The cartel your father protected you from has resurfaced," he announced, his words falling like stones in still water. "We've been monitoring their activities for the past 3 weeks. They're tracking anyone connected to the Lockridge name." The news hit them like a physical blow. Ruthie reached for Grace's trembling hand, while Jonah's jaw clenched visibly. "What exactly do they want with us?" Ava asked, her voice steady despite her pale face. Torres shared a look with his colleagues before, continuing. "Based on intercepted communications, they believe you inherited your birth parents' debts to their organization. In their minds, your parents' resistance to their operations created a financial burden that passed to their children." "That's insane!" Jonah exploded, taking a step forward. "Our birth parents were murdered for standing up to them, and now they think we owe them something." "Mr. Lockridge," Torres said firmly, "please understand the severity of this situation. These people operate on their own twisted logic. They've been waiting years for an opportunity like this." Caleb, drawing on his military experience, asked, "How did they even know to start looking now?" The agent's expression darkened. "That brings us to your father's death. We've uncovered evidence suggesting it wasn't natural causes." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Grace let out a small sob, while Ruthie wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Jonah's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with rage. "The timing of Graham Lockridge's death aligns with increased cartel activity in the region," Torres continued. "We believe they may have discovered his identity as the whistleblower who exposed their operation 20 years ago." Miriam, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "The meeting with Agent Parker." "Yes." Torres nodded. "Graham Lockridge was meant to meet with our retired colleague. He had new information about current cartel operations, information that died with him." The siblings absorbed this devastating revelation about their father's death, the betrayal of knowing he'd been murdered, that his heart attack had been engineered, left them reeling. "What are we supposed to do now?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Stay together," Torres advised firmly. "Don't leave the estate unless absolutely necessary. We'll have agents monitoring the area, but your best defense right now is unity and vigilance." He handed Caleb a secure phone. "Use this if you notice anything suspicious, anything at all." The agents departed as efficiently as they'd arrived, leaving the siblings to process their new reality. The mansion felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. As evening descended, they gathered around the long dining table, barely touching the meal Mrs. Chen had prepared. The house felt eerily quiet, every creak and settling noise drawing their attention. "We can't just sit here waiting to be picked off," Jonah said, breaking the tense silence. "The FBI said to stay put," Ivor reminded him. "And Dad spent years keeping us safe by keeping us apart," Caleb added. "Maybe we should split up, make it harder for them to track us." "No," Ruthie spoke up. surprising everyone with her firmness. "We're stronger together. That's what Dad's letters were trying to tell us. All these years of distance, that's what made us vulnerable." Grace nodded, finding her voice despite her fear. "Ruthie's right. We need to understand why they're really hunting us. There has to be more to this than just some made-up debt." A heavy silence fell as they considered their options. The mansion's security system hummed quietly in the background, its small red lights blinking steadily in the growing darkness. Then they heard it, the distinctive sound of a car engine revving somewhere beyond the gates. The noise rose and fell, like someone testing the vehicle's power. 7 heads turned toward the windows, dread pooling in their stomachs. The dining room's warm lighting suddenly felt like a spotlight, exposing them to whatever waited in the darkness beyond. Jonah moved first, striding to the window controls to close the heavy drapes. The soft whir of the motorized curtains seemed obscenely loud in the silence, and they all knew that their lives had irrevocably changed. The safety they'd taken for granted had vanished, replaced by a threat that had been waiting in the shadows for 20 years. The pale light of dawn crept over the Colorado mountains as Ava pressed her forehead against the cool window glass. Her breath created small patches of fog as she scanned the empty driveway, searching for any sign of the mysterious car from the night before. The gravel path stretched pristine and undisturbed between the towering pine trees. "See anything?" Caleb's quiet voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway of the living room, already dressed in his running clothes, though they'd all agreed no one should go outside alone. "All clear," she whispered, not wanting to wake the others who had finally fallen asleep in various spots around the mansion. Just the usual morning fog. One by one, the remaining siblings stirred. They gathered in the kitchen where Mrs. Chen had prepared a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh coffee. The familiar smells helped ease some of their tension, though conversation remained sparse and guarded. "I found something else," Miriam announced as they finished eating. Her face looked drawn, evidence of another sleepless night. "There's another section of the safe room I haven't shown you yet." They followed her back to Graham's study, watching as she input a different code into the keypad hidden behind the false bookshelf. A second door clicked open, revealing a smaller room lined with filing cabinets. "Your father kept detailed surveillance reports," Miriam explained, pulling open a drawer. "He tracked cartel movements for 20 years, monitoring any potential threats to your safety." The siblings spread the files across the study's large desk. Photographs showed familiar faces from news reports alongside surveillance notes in Graham's neat handwriting. Dates, locations, and connections formed a web of criminal activity stretching across decades. "Look at this," Elise said suddenly, her teacher's eye for detail catching something others had missed. She laid out several timeline sheets side by side. "These cartel operations, they line up perfectly with major political scandals. See? When the drug running increased in El Paso, suddenly the district attorney resigned for health reasons. Every time law enforcement got close, someone in power intervened." Jonah leaned over her shoulder, frowning. "The corruption goes deeper than we thought. They've got people everywhere. Judges, politicians, maybe even federal agents. That's why Dad could never fully expose them," Ruthie realized, her voice soft with understanding. "He wasn't just protecting us from the cartel. He was protecting us from the whole system." By mid-morning, the weight of their discoveries felt suffocating. Marcus suggested they take a break, get some fresh air within the estate's secure walls. They walked the carefully maintained paths, their footsteps crunching on gravel as autumn leaves danced around them. "Remember when Dad used to push us on that swing?" Grace pointed to an old wooden swing hanging from a massive oak tree. The sight triggered a flood of memories. "He taught me to climb that tree." Caleb smiled. Said I needed to learn the difference between bravery and recklessness. Ivor touched the swing's rope. He would sit here some evenings, just watching us play. I always thought he seemed sad, but now I understand. He was watching for danger, even then. They continued their walk, sharing fragments of memories that felt different now with context. The birthday parties that were never too large or public. The careful screening of their friends, the way Graham insisted on driving them everywhere himself, never hiring outside help. He loved us, Elise said firmly. Everything he did, every restriction or rule, it was all to keep us safe. The afternoon sun was starting to dip when they returned to the house. Miriam met them at the door, holding up her phone with concern etched on her face. "There's a voicemail from Agent Parker," she said. "The retired FBI agent your father trusted. He wants to meet with you tomorrow in town. Says it's urgent." They gathered in the living room to listen to the message. Parker's voice was gruff but steady. "This is Agent Parker. I have information about Graham's death and the current threat. Meet me at the Bluebird Cafe downtown tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Come carefully. Trust no one outside your family." The siblings spent the next several hours debating who should go. Too many would draw attention, but too few might be dangerous. "I should definitely be there," Caleb insisted, his military training making him a logical choice. "I'll go too," Jonah added. "I know how to spot surveillance from my time as a reporter." 3 would be better, Ivor suggested. "I can drive and keep watch while you two meet with Parker." They prepared a list of questions, trying to anticipate what information would be most crucial. The other siblings would stay at the estate with Miriam, monitoring security cameras and keeping in contact through secure phones. Night fell. They gathered in the library, the room where this had all started just days ago with Graham's letters. The weight of tomorrow's meeting hung heavy in the air. Ava found herself drawn to the window seat where she used to read as a child. Kneeling there now, she closed her eyes and folded her hands, her whispered prayer carrying the fears and hopes of all 7 siblings. "Lord, watch over us as Dad did for so many years. Keep us safe, guide us to the truth, and help us understand what we're meant to do with it. Amen." The others remained respectfully quiet, each lost in their own thoughts as darkness settled over the estate. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions. For now, they had each other, their father's protection extending beyond death through the truth he'd left behind. Grey clouds hung low over the Colorado mountains as Ava guided the black SUV down the winding road toward town. In the passenger seat, Caleb kept his eyes on the rearview mirrors, while Jonah and Ruthie sat quietly in the back. The morning air felt heavy with anticipation. "No one's following us," Caleb said softly, though his posture remained alert. His military training showed in the way he scanned their surroundings, noting every vehicle they passed. Ruthie twisted her hands in her lap. "I still think we should have brought Grace. She's good at reading people." "Too risky," Jonah replied, his contractor's calloused hands gripping the door handle. "The fewer of us exposed, the better." Ivor navigated through the small mountain town streets, past local shops and cafes, until she spotted the Bluebird Cafe. It was a modest place, with large windows and faded blue trim, tucked between a bookstore and a hardware shop. "Park where we can see the entrance," Caleb instructed. Ava found a spot across the street with a clear view of both the cafe's front door and the alley beside it. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and maple syrup. A few regular customers sat scattered at various tables, most of them older locals lingering over late breakfast. Behind the counter, a waitress refilled coffee cups with practiced efficiency. They spotted Henry Talbot immediately, a man in his 60s wearing a worn leather jacket, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. His weathered face carried the careful watchfulness of someone who had spent decades looking over his shoulder. "You must be Graham's kids," he said quietly as they slid into the booth. His voice was gruff but kind. I knew your father well. A good man. One of the best. The waitress approached, and they ordered coffee to avoid drawing attention. Once she moved away, Henry leaned forward, keeping his voice low. Graham contacted me 3 weeks before he died. Said he'd found something big, a financial ledger that could blow everything wide open. Henry's eyes darted to the door before continuing. It traced cartel money through shell companies straight into campaign funds, judicial, retirement accounts, even law enforcement pension plans, the kind of proof that could end careers and start federal investigations. Ruthie's hand trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. Is that why they killed him? Graham was careful. Henry nodded. He knew they were closing in. That's why he prepared those letters for you, made sure you'd know the truth if anything happened. Caleb's jaw tightened. What makes us so important? Why are they still interested in us after all these years? Because you're living proof, Henry explained. Each of you represents a family they destroyed, witnesses they silenced. Your very existence is evidence of their crimes. Graham protected you by making you disappear, giving you new identities. But now that he's gone, they want to clean up loose ends. Jonah finished grimly. Henry reached inside his jacket and carefully slid a thick manila envelope across the table. This is a copy of the ledger Graham found. Keep it safe. There are people, good people, in the FBI who want to help, but we need time to build a case that can't be buried. The bell above the cafe door chimed. A man in a dark suit entered, his eyes scanning the room too deliberately to be casual. He took a seat at the counter, but kept glancing their direction in the reflection of the chrome coffee machine. Time to go, Caleb murmured, sliding out of the booth. Different directions. Meet at the car. They separated smoothly, leaving through different exits. Ava's heart pounded as she walked quickly down the sidewalk, clutching her purse with the envelope inside. When they regrouped at the SUV minutes later, the suited man had not followed. The drive back to the estate was tense, each of them watching for signs of surveillance. Only when the gates closed behind them did they begin to breathe normally again. Inside, they found the others waiting anxiously in the study. Grace pulled Ruthie into a tight hug while Marcus paced by the windows. Elise sat at the desk, ready to take notes. We need to go through everything, Ava said, carefully removing the ledger from her purse. Every name, every transaction. They spent the next several hours examining the documents, creating lists of names and connections. The complexity of the corruption was staggering, a web of influence and money that stretched across decades. As evening approached, Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he'd been researching names. We should digitize all of this, he suggested. Everything in the safe room, all Dad's files. We need backups in case anything happens to the originals. The siblings worked together into the night, taking turns scanning documents while others organized the digital files. The steady hum of the scanner filled the study as page after page was preserved. Dad knew all this, Elise said softly, holding a photograph of Graham at his desk, looking tired but determined. He carried this burden alone for so long. Not anymore, Jonah replied, his usual gruffness softened by exhaustion and understanding. Now we carry it together. By midnight, their eyes were burning from staring at documents, and the weight of the day's revelations sat heavy on their shoulders. They carefully returned the original files to the safe room, double-checking the locks. We'll continue tomorrow, Caleb said, reaching for the light switch. We need clear heads for this. The study went dark, leaving only the soft glow of security lights in the hallway. One by one, they headed upstairs to their childhood bedrooms, each lost in thoughts of their father's sacrifice and the truth that had finally come to light. Rain drummed steadily against the mansion's windows, creating a somber backdrop as the Lockridge siblings gathered in the living room. The morning light was muted and grey, matching their serious expressions as they spread documents across the antique coffee table and surrounding furniture. "Let's organize this systematically," Caleb suggested, adjusting his reading glasses. "We'll cross-reference Graham's files with Henry's ledger, create a timeline of events." Ava settled onto the plush carpet, surrounded by manila folders. "I'll start with the earliest dates," she offered, her nurse's organizational skills coming in handy. They worked in focused silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of paper or quiet observation. Elise typed rapidly on her laptop, creating a digital timeline as her siblings called out dates and events. "Wait." Ava's voice trembled slightly as she held up a yellowed newspaper clipping. "This is about my birth mother." The others paused their work, watching as she read the article with growing emotion. She wasn't just a gospel singer. She was hiding in plain sight, performing with a church choir while trying to protect me. Iva's fingers traced the grainy photo of a women's choir. She disappeared 3 days after this picture was taken. Grace moved to sit beside her sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "She was so brave, Ava. Just like you." Jonah's gruff voice broke through the moment. "Got something here too." He held up a police report, his jaw tight. "My father. My birth father owned an auto repair shop in New Mexico. The cartel tried to use it for smuggling operations, but he refused." His hands clenched around the paper. "He lost everything because he wouldn't give in." "That's where you get your strength from," Ruthie said softly, earning a rare, vulnerable look from her usually stoic brother. As the morning progressed, more connections emerged. They discovered court records that had been deliberately altered, birth certificates that vanished from county files, and school records that mysteriously disappeared, all orchestrated by officials in the cartel's pocket. "Look at these dates," Caleb pointed out, laying several documents side by side. "Every time one of our birth families was targeted, there was a corresponding promotion or suspicious financial transaction involving someone in power." Marcus shook his head in disgust. "They built their careers on destroying our families." By midday, the storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh, rain-washed sky. The siblings took a much-needed break, stepping out onto the covered patio to breathe in the clean air. Water dripped from the trees, creating a peaceful counterpoint to the heavy revelations of the morning. "I remember playing out here," Grace said, touching a wet garden chair. "Graham would watch us from his study window, always keeping an eye out." "He was protecting us even then," Elise replied. "We just didn't know from what." When they regrouped in the living room, Caleb had a suggestion. "There's a journalist Graham mentioned in his files, Sarah Chen. She's known for exposing government corruption, and according to his notes, he trusted her." "Can we risk bringing in an outsider?" Jonah questioned, his protective instincts flaring. "We need someone who can get the truth out there," Ava reasoned. "If Graham trusted her, that means something." After further discussion, they agreed to reach out to the journalist. Elise found her contact information and composed a careful email, revealing just enough to pique interest without exposing too much. The evening settled in as they shared a simple dinner of delivered pizza, none of them wanting to leave the work for too long. Back in the study, they began the painstaking process of uploading their digitized files to a secure cloud drive Marcus had set up. "We need more storage space," Marcus announced, checking his laptop. "And I could use some coffee. I'll make a quick run to the store. We're almost out of everything anyway." "I don't like anyone going out alone," Jonah protested. "It's just the convenience store," Marcus assured him, grabbing his jacket. 5 minutes away, 10 minutes tops. I'll take my phone and keep it on." Despite their concerns, they knew they needed supplies. They watched from the window as Marcus walked to his car, the security lights casting long shadows across the driveway. As he pulled away from the estate, none of them noticed the dark van parked further down the road, its engine quietly coming to life. Marcus hummed softly to himself as he pulled into the convenience store's small parking lot. The fluorescent lights created pools of harsh brightness against the gathering darkness, but the lot itself was dimly lit at the edges. He stepped out of his car, keys jingling in his hand, unaware of the van that slowly rolled toward him through the shadows. A piercing scream shattered the quiet night, echoing across the parking lot before being abruptly cut off. Inside the van, Marcus struggled against strong hands that pinned him down, but his efforts proved futile as a cloth pressed against his face. The van's tires squealed against the asphalt as it accelerated away, leaving behind only his dropped phone on the dimly lit pavement. Back at the estate, the siblings were organizing files when they heard the distant screech of tires. The sound made them all freeze, papers suspended mid-sort. That came from the direction of the store, Caleb said, already moving toward the door. They rushed outside, their footsteps thundering down the driveway. Jonah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the empty road. No sign of Marcus's car returning. "Something's wrong," Ruthie whispered, her voice trembling. "He should be back by now." Grace tried calling Marcus's phone, and they heard it ring faintly in the distance. Caleb and Jonah sprinted towards the sound, finding the device lying face down in the convenience store parking lot. Marcus's car sat empty nearby, driver's door still open. "No, no, no," Ruthie moaned, tears already streaming down her face. "This is all my fault. I should have insisted he stay home. We all should have." Ivor pulled out her phone with shaking hands, dialing the FBI contact number they'd been given. "We need help," she said when the agent answered. "They've taken our brother." Within an hour, the parking lot was alive with activity. FBI agents moved purposefully through the scene, taking photos and collecting evidence. Inside the store, others reviewed security footage that showed the exact moment of the abduction. The dark van appearing suddenly, multiple men grabbing Marcus before he could react. Back at the estate, the siblings huddled in the living room while agents continued their investigation. Jonah paced aggressively near the fireplace, his fists clenching and unclenching. "We should be out there looking for him," he exploded. "Not sitting here doing nothing." "And go where?" Caleb shot back, his military training evident in his controlled fury. "We need to be strategic about this." "Strategic?" Jonah whirled on him. "While they're doing God knows what to our brother." "Stop it, both of you." Ivor stepped between them, her nurse's authority cutting through their anger. "Fighting each other won't help Marcus." The lead FBI agent, Agent Rivera, spread a map across the coffee table. The van headed south based on traffic cameras. The method matches known cartel tactics: quick grab, professional execution, minimal witnesses. Ruthie sat curled in an armchair, her face tear-stained. "He was just getting coffee," she whispered. "He was only going to be gone 10 minutes. Grace moved to sit beside her, though her own hands trembled as she held her sister. The siblings gathered around the table with the agents, reviewing every detail of Marcus's movements that evening. They traced his route, analyzed the timing, searched for any detail that might help. Hours crawled by. The sky outside began to lighten, though none of them had slept. Empty coffee cups littered the table among the maps and photos. Grace's phone buzzed suddenly in the pre-dawn quiet, making everyone jump. She opened the message, then let out a choked sob. "Oh, God!" The others crowded around her screen. The photo showed Marcus tied to a chair in what appeared to be an empty warehouse. His head was slumped forward, but they could see he was breathing. Below the image was a message that made their blood run cold. "Return what was stolen, or he dies." Ruthie collapsed against Ava, who held her sister tightly while fighting back her own tears. Jonah swore violently, kicking a nearby chair. Caleb's face went stark white, his military training warring with his fear for his brother. "What do they mean, what was stolen?" Grace asked, her voice small. "The ledger," Caleb said grimly. "The evidence Graham collected. They must know we have it." Agent Rivera immediately began coordinating with his team, setting up trace attempts on the message origin. But the siblings barely heard the flurry of activity around them. They drew closer together, forming a tight circle of shared fear and determination. The first rays of sunrise crept through the windows, painting the room in pale gold that felt mockingly peaceful. Ava reached for her siblings' hands, and one by one they joined together, drawing strength from each other as they had as children. "We're going to find him," Ava said firmly, though her voice shook. "Whatever it takes." They held on to each other as the new day dawned, each silently praying for their brother's safety, while knowing that somewhere in a cold warehouse, Marcus was waiting for them to save him. Their fear was palpable in the morning light, but so was their resolve. They were Lockridges. By birth or adoption didn't matter anymore, and they would not let the cartel tear their family apart again. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, but it brought no warmth to the exhausted faces gathered around the breakfast table. Coffee cups sat mostly untouched. Toast grew cold on plates barely touched. Dark circles shadowed everyone's eyes. None of them had managed more than an hour of fitful sleep. Elise pushed her scrambled eggs around listlessly. "I keep seeing that photo whenever I close my eyes." Grace reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. The gesture of comfort was automatic, though her own fingers trembled slightly. The sharp sound of the doorbell made them all jump. 2 FBI agents stationed outside moved to answer it, and moments later, Henry Talbot strode into the kitchen, his weathered face grim but determined. "I've been tracking their communication patterns," he announced without preamble. "I knew they might try something like this. The cartel's getting desperate. They know Graham's evidence could destroy them." Jonah stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "You knew this could happen. Why didn't you warn us?" "Jonah," Ava said quietly, touching his arm. The anger in his face softened slightly, but remained. Henry met their accusations steadily. "I've been monitoring chatter since Graham's death, but they've gotten more sophisticated over the years. It's harder to predict their exact moves." Agent Rivera entered the kitchen then, nodding respectfully to Henry. The two men had clearly worked together before, and their professional rapport was evident as they began laying out papers on the cleared breakfast table. "We need a two-pronged approach," Henry explained, pointing to various documents. "First, we gather every piece of evidence, not just what Graham collected, but your own testimonies about what happened to your birth families. We make it so public, so widespread, that the cartel has no choice but to retreat." "And the second prong?" Caleb asked, his military mind already analyzing strategy. "While they're scrambling to contain the PR nightmare, we coordinate a rescue." Agent Rivera finished. "We've already identified 3 possible warehouse locations based on the photo they sent." Hope flickered across the siblings' faces for the first time since Marcus's kidnapping. They spent the next several hours in focused activity, organizing files, scanning documents, writing detailed statements about their childhood memories and what they'd learned about their birth parents. Around noon, Henry made a call to the investigative journalist Graham had trusted. "Karen, we need you. It's about Graham Lockridge's children." The journalist agreed to come to the estate that evening. While they waited, FBI technical experts helped them compile everything into secure digital formats, creating multiple backups of all evidence. As sunset painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, Karen Matthews arrived. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, with keen eyes that missed nothing. She set up her recording equipment in Graham's study and interviewed each sibling individually. "Tell me about the moment you learned the truth," she asked Ava first, her voice gentle but professional. Ava's voice shook slightly as she described opening Graham's letter. "Everything I thought I knew about my life changed in those few minutes." One by one, the siblings shared their stories. Ruthie broke down crying several times during her interview. Jonah's anger simmered beneath every word. Grace spoke softly about her gratitude to Graham, despite everything. Caleb provided military-precise details about the evidence they'd uncovered. Elise described the pain of learning about her birth mother's fate. In between interviews, agents continued working in the background, coordinating with teams monitoring the warehouse locations. Maps were spread across tables, surveillance photos were analyzed, tactical options were discussed in low voices. Karen worked efficiently, cross-referencing their statements with the documentary evidence. By the time full darkness had fallen, she had enough to begin crafting the story that would blow the cartel's operation wide open. "I'll start writing as soon as I get back to my office," she promised. "As soon as the FBI gives final confirmation on the sources, we'll publish. My editor is already on standby. This will go live across multiple platforms simultaneously." After she left, the siblings gathered in the living room. Only a few lamps were lit, casting long shadows across their tired faces. They sat close together, drawing comfort from each other's presence while acutely aware of the empty space where Marcus should have been. "Do you think it will work?" Grace asked softly. "Will making everything public really help save him?" "It has to," Ivor replied, her nurse's composure cracking slightly. "They can't hide anymore once everyone knows the truth." Caleb leaned forward, his military training evident in his focused expression. "The evidence is solid. Between Graham's files and our testimonies, it exposes decades of corruption. They'll have to back off to protect themselves." "And if they don't?" Jonah's question hung heavy in the air. "Then we'll find another way," Ruthie said with unexpected firmness. "We're not losing another family member to them." Elise reached for Grace's hand, then Ava's. One by one, they all linked hands, forming an unbroken circle in the dim light. No one spoke for a long moment. They didn't need to. Their shared grief was a tangible presence, but so was their determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside, FBI agents continued their vigilant watch over the estate. Somewhere in the city, Karen Matthews began writing the story that would shake the foundations of power. And in an unknown warehouse, Marcus waited, not knowing that his family was working tirelessly to bring him home. The siblings sat together in their circle of lamplight and shadow, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by their shared purpose. They were ready to do whatever it took to save their brother, to ensure that the cartel couldn't destroy any more families. Their father had spent his life protecting them. Now it was their turn to protect each other. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the windows when Miriam knocked on each sibling's door. Her face held a mix of determination and sorrow as she gathered them in the hallway, still in their pajamas and robes. "There's something else you need to see," she said softly. "Graham. He left one more thing, just in case." They followed her to the safe room, where the morning chill seemed more pronounced among the metal filing cabinets and concrete walls. Miriam's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out an old laptop from a hidden compartment behind a panel. "He recorded this message 6 months ago," she explained, setting the laptop on the desk. "He made me promise to show it only if real danger came back into your lives." The siblings crowded around the screen, shoulders touching as they huddled together. Ruthie wrapped her arms around herself, while Ava placed a steadying hand on Grace's back. Jonah and Caleb stood rigid, their jaws tight. Elise wiped away tears before they could fall. When Miriam pressed play, their father's face filled the screen. Graham looked tired, his usually neat silver hair slightly disheveled, but his eyes burned with the same quiet intensity they all remembered. He was sitting in this very room, surrounded by the files that had consumed his final years. "My dear children," he began, his voice rougher than they remembered. "If you're watching this, it means the danger I tried so hard to protect you from has returned. First, I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. Sorry that I couldn't eliminate this threat completely. Sorry that I had to keep so many secrets." He paused, adjusting his glasses in that familiar way that made Grace let out a small sob. "But I'm not sorry for bringing you into my life. Saving each of you was the most important thing I ever did. You weren't just children I rescued, you became my heart, my purpose, my greatest hope." Graham leaned closer to the camera, his expression fierce with love. "I know you're probably angry with me, confused, scared. But remember this: you are stronger together than apart. The cartel's power comes from isolating people, making them feel alone and helpless. But you have each other. You have the truth. And you have the strength that comes from being loved. By your birth parents who died protecting their principles, and by me." He picked up a photograph, one they recognized from the study wall, showing all of them at a long-ago Christmas dinner. "Look at yourselves in this picture. Look at how far you've come. Ava, your compassion heals people every day. Jonah, your determination to fight injustice. Ruthie, your gentle spirit that helps troubled children. Marcus, your music that touches hearts. Elise, your brilliant mind solving complex problems. Caleb, your courage protecting others. And Grace, your joy that lights up every room." Tears were flowing freely now among the siblings as they watched their father's final message. "You were never meant to live in fear. I tried to give you normal lives, even though I knew normalcy was a fragile illusion. But now you know the full truth, and I believe that truth will protect you better than secrets ever could." Graham's eyes grew misty behind his glasses. "Whatever happens, remember this. Your survival was the greatest hope I ever carried. Every time I saw you grow, learn, laugh, it proved that evil doesn't win. Love does. Stand together, protect each other, and know that I am so very proud of each of you." The screen went dark, leaving them in silence, broken only by quiet sobs. Miriam handed out tissues, her own eyes red. After several minutes, Ava straightened her shoulders. "He's right. We need to stand together. For Marcus." Jonah nodded firmly. "I'll call Henry. See if there's any news about the warehouse location." While he stepped out to make the call, the others began moving with renewed purpose. Caleb and Elise went to pack emergency supplies, flashlights, first aid kits, water bottles. Grace and Ruthie helped Miriam gather warm clothes and blankets for Marcus. Ava coordinated with the FBI agents stationed outside. Henry arrived within the hour, his face grave but determined. "We've confirmed Marcus's location," he announced as they gathered in the kitchen. "An abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. Our surveillance shows regular movement in and out, matching cartel patterns." He spread a map across the kitchen table, pointing out key locations. "We'll move tonight, when their guard rotation is lightest. 2 tactical teams will secure the perimeter, while a 3rd goes in for extraction. We're coming with you," Caleb stated firmly. It wasn't a question. Henry studied their faces, all showing the same resolve, and nodded slowly. "Stay in the convoy. Follow every instruction immediately. No heroics." The day passed in a blur of preparation and prayer. As sunset approached, they gathered in the living room, joining hands in a circle. Ruthie's voice shook as she prayed for Marcus's safety and their success. When darkness fell, they moved out in a tight convoy, 3 FBI vehicles, with the siblings split between them. Ava rode with Henry. Her medical training might be needed. Caleb and Jonah were in the lead car with the tactical team. The others followed close behind, watching the familiar streets of their hometown give way to the deteriorating edges of the industrial district. Their headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty loading docks and rusted chain-link fences. The warehouses loomed ahead like silent sentinels, their windows dark and empty. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Marcus was waiting. The convoy slowed, lights dimming to a minimum as they approached their target. Through the windows, they could see FBI agents taking up positions in the shadows. The rescue was about to begin. The pre-dawn air bit cold and sharp as the siblings crouched behind the FBI vehicles, their breath forming small clouds in the darkness. Ruthie's hands trembled as she adjusted her binoculars, scanning the warehouse's weathered exterior. Grace held her sister's arm, offering silent support while they watched agents move like shadows across the empty lot. 2 guards at the loading dock, Caleb whispered, his military training evident in his precise observations. Another in the window above. Jonah stepped forward, jaw set with determination. I'm going in with them. Sir, this is a federal operation. An agent began, but Jonah cut him off. That's our brother in there. His voice was low but fierce. I'm not sitting out here while he needs us. Caleb moved to stand beside him. We've had tactical training. We can help. Henry Talbot conferred quietly with the team leader, who finally nodded reluctantly. Stay behind the strike team. Follow every command immediately. One wrong move and you're out. Ava grabbed both brothers' arms before they could move. Please be careful, she whispered, her eyes bright with tears. We can't lose any more family. They nodded, accepting Kevlar vests from the agents and checking their fit. The tactical team gathered around them, reviewing the final plan in hushed voices. Strike Team Alpha will enter through the loading dock, the team leader explained. Bravo Team covers the rear exit. Charlie Team maintains perimeter security. Elise, Grace, and Ruthie huddled together behind an armored vehicle, watching their brothers disappear into the darkness with the strike team. Ava stood slightly apart, medical kit ready, praying silently. The first explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence as agents breached the loading dock. Gunfire erupted immediately, sharp cracks echoing off concrete walls. Grace buried her face in Ruthie's shoulder, unable to watch. Elise gripped the binoculars so tight her knuckles went white. Inside the warehouse, Jonah and Caleb stayed close to the wall as directed, following the agents through the darkness. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as they cleared each section methodically. The sounds of fighting grew louder as they approached the center of the building. Contact front! An agent shouted as more gunfire erupted. They ducked behind storage crates as bullets whizzed overhead. Second level, 3 hostiles. Another voice called out. Through the chaos, Caleb spotted a separate room off to the side. There, he pointed, recognizing the layout from their intelligence briefing. The team provided covering fire as Jonah and Caleb sprinted to the room. The door was locked, but a swift kick from Jonah sent it crashing inward. Marcus sat tied to a chair in the center of the room, his head slumped forward. His face was bruised, clothes dirty, but he stirred at their entrance. We've got you, little brother, Jonah said hoarsely, pulling out a knife to cut the ropes while Caleb covered the door. Knew you'd come, Marcus mumbled, trying to smile despite his split lip. Caleb moved to help support Marcus's weight as they lifted him. Package secured, he called into his radio, requesting cover for extraction. Outside, the siblings heard the call over the FBI's communications and held their breath. The gunfire was intensifying. Multiple suspects surrendering. A voice crackled over the radio. West side clear. East side secured. Another agent reported. Ivor stepped forward as movement appeared at the warehouse entrance. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, Jonah and Caleb half carrying Marcus between them. "Marcus!" The sisters rushed forward as one, surrounding their brothers with cries of relief and tears. "Careful," Caleb warned as they reached to embrace Marcus. "He's pretty banged up." Paramedics hurried over with a stretcher, but Marcus weakly waved them off. Just let me hold my family for a minute." They formed a tight circle around him, touching his arms, his shoulders, his face, reassuring themselves he was really there, alive and safe. Tears flowed freely as the first rays of dawn began, painting the sky in pale gold. Henry approached with his phone out, showing them a news alert. The story just broke nationwide. The journalist timed it perfectly with the raid. Major arrests are already happening across 3 states. "The evidence?" Ava asked, not taking her eyes off Marcus. "Overwhelming. Their entire US network is compromised. They're falling like dominoes." The paramedics finally insisted on examining Marcus, helping him onto the stretcher despite his protests that he could walk. As they loaded him into the ambulance, he kept hold of Grace's hand. "Don't leave," he whispered. "Never again." She promised, climbing in beside him. The others hurried to their vehicles, ready to follow. Jonah paused before getting in, looking back at the warehouse where tactical teams were leading out handcuffed suspects. The sunrise painted the scene in stark light and shadow as justice finally arrived with the dawn. "Let's go." Caleb touched his shoulder. "Our family needs us." They drove away from the warehouse in a tight convoy, leaving behind the darkness as morning broke over the mountains. In the ambulance ahead, they could see Grace holding Marcus's hand while paramedics worked. Their brother was alive, their family was whole, and for the first time since learning the truth about their past, they were truly free. The late morning sun cast long shadows across the estate's driveway as 3 cars pulled up to the entrance. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his face bruised, but his eyes bright with relief. The hospital had cleared him after treating his injuries, mostly cuts and bruises, with mild dehydration, but no serious trauma. Ava and Elise helped him inside while the others carried his things. Though he insisted he could walk, his siblings hovered close, unwilling to let him out of their sight after the terrifying ordeal. "I just want a shower and real food," Marcus said with a weak smile as they settled him in the ground floor guest room. Hospital breakfast wasn't exactly gourmet. "I'll make something light," Grace offered, squeezing his hand before heading to the kitchen. The familiar smells of coffee and toast soon filled the house. By 10:30 they had gathered around the breakfast table, an assortment of eggs, fruit, and pastries spread before them. For several minutes no one spoke. They simply sat together, breathing in the peace of being whole again. "The FBI just sent an update," Caleb said quietly, checking his phone. "They've made 17 arrests since dawn, including 3 state officials and a federal judge. The evidence trail led straight to them." Jonah nodded grimly. "Graham's files and that ledger Henry found, it gave them everything they needed. The corrupt ones couldn't cover their tracks fast enough once the story broke." "I saw some of the news coverage at the hospital," Marcus added, wincing as he reached for his coffee. "Major networks are all over it. They're calling it one of the biggest corruption busts in state history." Ruthie wiped tears from her eyes. "I keep thinking about Dad, how long he carried this burden alone, trying to protect us." "Not entirely alone," Ava reminded her gently. "He had Miriam, Henry. He built a network of people he trusted, people who helped keep us safe." They finished breakfast slowly, no one wanting to rush. Around noon, Miriam brought in a large box from Graham's study, the last of the personal effects they hadn't yet examined. "These are the letters," she explained softly. "From your birth families. Graham preserved everything he could find." The siblings moved to the sunroom, where afternoon light streamed through tall windows. They settled into the comfortable chairs and couches, the box placed carefully on the coffee table. "Who wants to go first?" Elise asked, her voice trembling slightly. After a moment's hesitation, Grace reached for a yellowed envelope. "This one's from my mother," she said, unfolding the paper with shaking hands. Her voice caught as she began to read. "My dearest baby girl, I don't know if you'll ever see these words, but I need you to know you were born from the deepest love." One by one, they took turns reading letters aloud. Some were lengthy, others just brief notes. Many were tear-stained. All were filled with love, hope, and heartbreaking courage. Ruthie found a letter from her father, written the night before he testified against the cartel. Jonah discovered a birthday card his mother had prepared, never able to give it to him. Elise's hands shook as she read her parents' final message, expressing their faith that she would grow up strong and beautiful. The sunlight shifted across their faces as hours passed, catching the tears that flowed freely. They paused often to hold each other, to share memories, to simply sit in understanding silence. "They were so brave," Marcus said softly, holding a photograph of his birth parents. "All of them. They chose to stand up for what was right, knowing the cost." "Just like Graham did," Caleb added. "He didn't just save our lives. He honored their sacrifice by raising us with the same values they died protecting." Iva nodded, wiping her eyes. "He gave us more than safety. He gave us a foundation of love, integrity, faith. Everything our birth parents would have wanted for us." As evening approached, Grace and Elise went to prepare dinner while the others carefully returned the letters to their box. The kitchen soon filled with warm aromas: herb-roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the estate's garden. They gathered at the long dining table as darkness fell outside. Candles flickered softly, casting a gentle glow over their faces. For the first time in years, the meal wasn't rushed or tense. They passed dishes, shared memories, even laughed, the sound almost startling in its unfamiliarity. "Remember when Dad tried to teach us all to ski?" Ruthie asked, smiling at the memory. "And Jonah kept falling on purpose to make Marcus feel better about wiping out?" "He knew exactly what you were doing," Elise told Jonah, grinning. "He just didn't let on." Stories flowed freely as they ate, tales of childhood adventures and mishaps, of Graham's quiet wisdom and unexpected humor. The pain was still there, but it had softened somehow, making space for healing. Long after the food was gone, they remained at the table, reluctant to break the spell of connection that had settled over them. Miriam quietly cleared the dishes, leaving them to talk. "I didn't think we'd ever have this again," Marcus said softly, looking around at his siblings. "This feeling of being family. We lost our way for a while," Iva acknowledged. "But maybe we needed to understand our past to find our way back to each other." Caleb raised his water glass. "To Graham," he said simply, "and to all the parents who loved us enough to give us a chance at life." 7 glasses clinked together in the candlelight, the sound ringing with promise and peace. Outside, stars began appearing in the clear mountain sky, but inside, no one moved to leave the table. After years of running from their past and each other, they had finally found their way home. Morning sunlight painted golden stripes across the kitchen floor as the Lockridge siblings gathered for breakfast. The usual weight of fear and uncertainty had lifted, replaced by something lighter: hope. "It feels different today," Elise said softly, stirring honey into her tea. "Like we can finally breathe." Around the large wooden table, heads nodded in agreement. The tension that had gripped them for so long had dissolved, leaving room for possibility. After breakfast, they wandered through the estate's many rooms, seeing them with new eyes. The high-ceilinged halls that once felt oppressive now seemed full of potential. Each spacious room whispered of opportunities to help others. "You know," Elise said, pausing in the East Wing's sitting room, "I keep thinking about other kids out there. Ones who need help, like we once did." The others turned to look at her, and she continued, her voice growing stronger. "What if we could do something with all this space? Create a place that helps children who have nowhere else to go?" "A charity," Ivor said thoughtfully. "In Graham's name." "The Lockridge Home for Lost Children," Ruthie suggested, her eyes brightening. The idea spread through the room like sunlight, warming each face it touched. Marcus, still moving carefully from his ordeal, straightened in his chair. "We could convert this entire wing," he said. "There's plenty of room for offices, meeting spaces, maybe even temporary housing." Caleb was already pulling out his phone, making notes. "We'd need proper licensing, of course, legal framework, but with Graham's estate designated for charity anyway." "It's perfect," Grace finished. "It's exactly what Dad would have wanted." They gathered in the library, spreading papers across the antique desk as they began drafting ideas. Jonah, usually the quietest, contributed suggestions about security measures and screening processes. Ava's organizational skills emerged as she created initial outlines for staffing and operations. When Miriam entered with lunch trays, she found them deep in discussion. Tears welled in her eyes as they explained their vision. "Oh," she whispered, "Graham would be so proud. So very proud." She set down the trays and straightened her shoulders. "I want to help run it. I know every inch of this place, all the administrative systems. Let me be part of this." The siblings welcomed her enthusiasm, knowing her experience would be invaluable. Throughout the afternoon, they worked together, shaping their dream into reality. The mission statement took form under their careful consideration. The Lockridge Home for Lost Children exists to provide safety, support, and hope to children in crisis, continuing Graham Lockridge's legacy of protecting the vulnerable and believing in the power of second chances. At 3:00, they connected with legal advisors via video call. The lawyers' faces filled the library's large screen as they discussed the process of establishing a charitable foundation. Questions about tax status, board formation, and regulatory requirements filled the next 2 hours. "It's complex," the lead attorney admitted, "but entirely doable, especially given the estate's existing charitable designation. We can begin filing paperwork immediately." As the sun began its descent, Elise suggested they take a break. "Let's walk in the garden," she said. "Clear our heads a bit." They filed out onto the winding paths Graham had lovingly maintained. The late summer flowers were still blooming, dahlias and asters nodding in the evening breeze. Graham had spent countless hours here, finding peace among the plants he nurtured. Each sibling fell into their own thoughts as they walked. Ava remembered Graham teaching her the names of flowers when she was small. Jonah recalled helping him build the stone wall that bordered the rose garden. Marcus touched a tree he'd helped plant on his 10th birthday. The garden held so many memories of their father, not the distant, protective figure they'd sometimes resented, but the man who had sacrificed everything to give them life and love. Now they understood both versions of him, the cautious guardian and the tender parent. As the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they gathered on the wide back porch. Wooden rocking chairs creaked softly as they settled in, watching the day's final light paint the garden in golden hues. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The profound quiet held everything: their gratitude, their healing, their hope for the future. In the growing dusk, crickets began their evening song, and the first stars appeared overhead. They sat together as darkness settled over the estate that had once been their shelter and would soon become shelter for others. The legacy of Graham's love would live on, transformed into something new, but equally powerful. In the gentle night air, they could almost feel his approval, his joy at seeing them united in purpose. The mountain sunset painted the sky in deepening shades of purple and blue, while the siblings remained on the porch, sharing the peaceful moment in profound silence. Dawn broke over the Lockridge estate with promise in its golden rays. The siblings were already stirring, gathering in the kitchen before 6 o'clock for coffee and quick breakfast pastries. There was too much excitement to sit still for long. I found 3 more boxes of blankets in the East Wing storage, Elise announced, juggling her coffee mug. Dad must have been stockpiling supplies for years. Iva nodded, checking items off her clipboard. Add those to the donation inventory. We'll need everything for the temporary housing setup. The morning unfolded in a flurry of activity. Ruthie and Grace tackled the main parlor, transforming it into a welcoming reception area. They hung cheerful artwork on the walls and arranged comfortable seating in conversation groups. Marcus, still moving carefully but insisting on helping, sorted through filing cabinets with Miriam, organizing years of Graham's careful documentation. Look at this, Marcus called out, holding up a folder. Dad kept records of every local children's organization he'd donated to. Some of these relationships go back 20 years. Caleb paused in his work of setting up computers in the new office space. Perfect. Those are exactly the community partners we need to contact. Can you and Miriam start making calls? In the grand dining room, now designated as a meeting hall, Jonah and Ava worked together, hanging a large sign reading, "The Lockridge Home for Lost Children," in elegant letters. As they stepped back to check its placement, Ava noticed Jonah's quiet smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just remembering how Dad used to sit at this table for hours, working late into the night. I used to think he was just busy with business. Now I know he was probably coordinating all of this, protecting us, helping others, building these networks." Around noon, they gathered in the kitchen for sandwiches, sharing discoveries from their morning's work. Grace had found a box of children's books in perfect condition. Ruthie uncovered a closet full of new school supplies. Every revelation painted a clearer picture of Graham's long-term vision. "He was always planning for this," Elise said softly. "Even when we thought he was distant or preoccupied, he was laying the groundwork for something bigger than ourselves." The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows when the investigative journalist arrived for her follow-up interview. They welcomed her into the newly arranged parlor, where Marcus joined them for the first time since his rescue. "This is quite a transformation," the journalist remarked, setting up her recording equipment. "Both the space and all of you. You seem lighter." One by one, they shared their perspectives on healing and hope. Marcus spoke about finding strength in family during his captivity. Ava described how understanding Graham's sacrifices had changed her view of their childhood. Each sibling contributed pieces to the story of their journey from fear to purpose. "What do you hope this place will mean to others?" the journalist asked. "Safety," Ruthie answered immediately. "The kind Dad gave us. Second chances," Jonah added. "Real ones with support behind them." "Family," Marcus said quietly. "Sometimes family finds you in unexpected ways." After the interview, they walked through the great hall together, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Tomorrow, these spaces would be filled with community leaders, potential partners, and the first families seeking help. But for now, it was just them, imagining the future in each corner. "The intake office here," Ava pointed. "The counseling rooms upstairs, the children's play area in the sunroom." They could almost see it. Children finding refuge, parents receiving support, lives being transformed just as theirs had been. Graham's spirit seemed to fill the space with approval. As evening approached, they finished the last preparations. Ruthie arranged welcome packets at the reception desk. Caleb did final checks on the security systems. Grace placed fresh flowers throughout the common areas. Every detail was attended to with care and hope. When night settled over the estate, they gathered one last time around the living room fireplace. The flames cast warm light on their tired but content faces. No one spoke for a long while, each lost in private thoughts of how far they'd come. Marcus strummed quiet chords on his guitar, a gentle melody floating through the room. Elise rested her head on Ruthie's shoulder. Jonah and Caleb sat close together, their usual tension dissolved into comfortable silence. Ava watched them all with grateful eyes, while Grace curled up in Graham's old armchair, looking perfectly at home. The fire crackled softly as the evening deepened. One by one, they began heading up to bed, exchanging warm hugs and whispered goodnights. Their hearts were full of peace, their minds clear with purpose, their souls connected in ways they'd never imagined possible just weeks ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight they rested in the simple comfort of being family. As each sibling retired to their room, the estate settled into quiet, wrapped in the legacy of Graham's love and the promise of new beginnings. The morning sun painted the Colorado mountains gold as dozens of cars filled the estate's circular driveway. Fresh flowers adorned every entrance, their sweet perfume mixing with the crisp autumn air. Colorful banners rippled in the gentle breeze, proclaiming, "Welcome to the Lockridge Home for Lost Children." Community leaders, social workers, and local families gathered on the lawn where rows of white chairs faced a simple podium. The 7 Lockridge siblings stood together near the stage, each holding their birth family letters close to their hearts. These papers, once heavy with pain and secrets, now felt like badges of honor, proof of survival, love, and redemption. Ava smoothed her navy dress, drawing strength from her siblings' presence. Jonah gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. Ruthie's eyes shone with pride. Marcus, still bearing faint bruises from his ordeal, stood tall beside Caleb. Elise and Grace completed their circle, united in ways they'd never imagined possible just weeks ago. The crowd settled as Ava approached the podium. Sunlight caught the tears in her eyes, making them sparkle as she looked out at the gathered faces. Her hands steady on the wooden lectern, she began to speak. 20 years ago, a billionaire adopted 7 abandoned children. Her voice carried clear and strong across the lawn. That's what the newspapers said. That's what everyone believed. But today, the real story has finally come to light. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. Graham Lockridge saved us not out of obligation, but out of love strong enough to change our lives. He protected us from dangers we didn't know existed. He gave us not just a home, but a future. And in his final act of love, he left us the truth about our past, not to hurt us, but to show us who we really are, survivors, warriors, and most importantly, family. The crowd listened in rapt attention as Ava continued. This home represents everything our father believed in, that every child deserves safety, that every family deserves support, that love can overcome the darkest circumstances. Today we honor his legacy by opening our doors to others who need what we once needed, a chance, a home, a family. Applause thundered across the lawn as the siblings gathered around the ribbon stretching across the main entrance. Together they raised the ceremonial scissors and cut the purple silk. Cheers erupted as the ribbon fluttered to the ground, marking the official opening of their sanctuary for lost children. The crowd moved inside, filling the transformed halls with laughter and conversation. The siblings led tours through the newly renovated spaces, counseling rooms decorated in soothing colors, dormitory-style emergency housing equipped with fresh linens, play areas filled with toys and books, and a massive kitchen ready to serve warm meals to those in need. Volunteers in matching blue shirts greeted potential partners while social workers discussed placement procedures. In the sunroom, children from local foster homes played with new toys, their joy filling the space with the exact energy the siblings had hoped to create. Miriam moved through the rooms with clipboard in hand, coordinating with staff and answering questions. Her eyes glistened whenever she passed the large portrait of Graham hanging in the main hall, his kind eyes watching over the very future he'd dreamed of creating. As afternoon faded into evening, the crowds thinned until only the closest supporters remained. The siblings gathered on the wide back porch, where paper lanterns cast soft light over comfortable wicker furniture. They settled into a circle, hands naturally finding each other until they were completely connected. The mountain air grew cool as they sat in peaceful silence, each lost in thoughts of the day's events and the journey that had brought them here. The estate no longer felt haunted by secrets and fear. Instead, it hummed with purpose and possibility. Marcus rubbed his healing wrist thoughtfully. Dad would be proud of this. He is proud. Grace corrected gently. I can feel it. Ruthie squeezed Ava's hand. We all can. They gazed out at the darkening gardens where Graham had once walked alone, carrying the weight of so many secrets. Now those same paths would welcome children seeking shelter, families rebuilding their lives, and a community coming together to help its most vulnerable members. The soft glow of the lanterns wrapped around them like a warm embrace as they sat together, marveling at the family they had become. What had started in fear and confusion had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to Graham's love and their own courage to choose hope over hurt, unity over division, and love over loss. The evening had grown quiet, yet none of the siblings made a move to head inside. The soft glow of the lanterns cast gentle shadows across their faces as they sat together on the porch, each lost in thoughts about the momentous day. Let's take one last walk through the garden, Grace suggested softly, standing up and smoothing her dress. I want to remember everything about today. The others nodded, rising from their seats. The cool night breeze rustled through their hair as they made their way down the stone path Graham had laid with his own hands decades ago. In the moonlight, they noticed something they'd overlooked before. The flowers bloomed in familiar shades that matched the colored papers of their birth family letters. Deep crimson roses, sunshine yellow daffodils, and cobalt blue delphiniums lined the paths. Look at these colors, Ruthie whispered, touching a velvet soft petal. They're exactly like our letters. Do you think Dad planned it this way? Knowing Graham, every detail meant something. Jonah replied, his voice thick with emotion. As they reached the garden's center, Caleb stopped abruptly. Wait, has anyone ever noticed this before? He pointed to a weathered wooden bench, partially hidden by climbing vines. A small metal plaque caught the moonlight, though years of exposure had left it dusty and dim. Caleb stepped forward, gently brushing away the accumulated grime. His breath caught as he read the words aloud, "For the children who will outlive the darkness." The siblings gathered close, their hearts heavy with understanding. Graham had placed this message here long ago, believing in their future even when they couldn't see it themselves. Wordlessly, they settled onto and around the old bench. Marcus leaned against its arm, while Grace sat cross-legged on the ground, her head resting against Ava's knee. They shared quiet memories of their birth parents, of Graham's countless small kindnesses, and of the purpose that now filled their lives through the Lockridge home. The moon climbed higher, casting silver light across their faces as they talked. They spoke of how their shelter would give other children the same chance they'd received, a safe haven, a fresh start, a family. When the night air grew too crisp to ignore, they made their way back to the warmly lit porch. Ava paused at the top step, turning to face her siblings with tears in her eyes. "This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Right here, right now. This is the first time in my life I've felt completely safe." They came together in a tight embrace, 7 hearts beating as one beneath the gentle lantern light, forever bound as a family, healed, whole, and unshakably united. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.